Tehran, 1951, midnight. 45 years after Iran built its democracy. The lights go out across the city, not because of a power failure, because someone decided they should. In the darkness, a network of men is waiting. Soldiers, gangsters, newspaper editors, clergymen, all of them recruited, all of them paid, all of them waiting for the same signal. They have been waiting 2 years. In 1953, the world was told that the CIA organized a coup against Iran's democratically elected prime minister. That story is true. It is also incomplete. Because before the CIA had a budget, before a single American dollar crossed the border, British intelligence had already built the machine. They had recruited the agents, paid the officers, organized the mobs, written the propaganda, mapped every pressure point in Tehran's political structure, piece by piece, over 2 years. In complete secrecy, they had given it a name, Operation Boot. The CIA arrived in 1953 and put their name on it. History believed them. Do you know what happened? This is the story of who actually built it. You already know what Mossadegh stood for. What Britain couldn't accept was that he was winning. He was Iran's democratically elected prime minister, a constitutional lawyer who had spent 30 years in Iranian politics, a man Time magazine would name Person of the Year, above Churchill, above Eisenhower, above every world leader of 1951. He conducted his official government meetings from his bed, in his pajamas, because of a heart condition he had carried for decades. He was 69 years old. He was the most dangerous man in the British Empire, not because of what he wanted to do, because of what he had already done. On May 1st, 1951, the Iranian parliament votes to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian oil company. The vote is unanimous. In London, this lands like a bomb. The Anglo-Iranian oil company is not simply a business. Since 1914, the British government has owned 51% of it. Iranian oil powers the Royal Navy. It funds the British welfare state. It is the financial spine of post-war British recovery. In 1950 alone, Britain extracts profits of £170 million from Iranian oil. Iran's share? 16%. Mossadegh has done the arithmetic. He has done the legal research. He has done the parliamentary work. He has won, through completely legal, completely democratic means. And Britain cannot allow that. Britain's response is total. Navy, embargo, technicians pulled from Abadan. Mossadegh won every legal battle. The Hague, the UN, every legal battlefield. Britain lost every time. So Britain stops fighting legally. And here is where you need to understand something about the British Empire. It did not accept defeat. Not through law, not through democratic process, not through international courts. When every legitimate route was closed, when the rules produced the wrong answer, Britain did not respect the rules. It built new ones, in secret, in the dark. What comes next stayed hidden for decades, buried in classified files, whispered about in intelligence circles, officially denied until documents began surfacing in the 1980s, and not fully confirmed until 2013. What Britain built in those 2 years is one of the most meticulously documented covert operations in history. And almost nobody knows it was British. In the summer of 1951, a cable arrives at the British Embassy in Tehran from MI6 headquarters, London. The instructions are classified at the highest level. Find the people, build the network, prepare the conditions for regime change. The officer assigned is Norman Derbyshire. He is 35 years old. He has served in Iran before. He speaks Persian. He understands the social hierarchies that Western diplomats usually miss. He is exactly the kind of man this operation requires. His first task, identify the network. In Tehran, there are 3 brothers, the Rashidians, Iranian businessmen, deeply connected to royalist factions. Men who have been receiving British payments for years through commercial relationships carefully designed to obscure their true function. Derbyshire activates them, and through them, he begins to map Tehran's pressure points with surgical precision, which newspaper editors have financial problems, which religious figures can be reached through funding, which military officers are dissatisfied, which gangs control which streets. He is not building a protest. He is building an infrastructure. The newspapers first. Several major Tehran dailies begin receiving funds through intermediaries, not to run a single story, to sustain a months-long campaign of manufactured doubt. Mossadegh is incompetent. Mossadegh is a communist. Mossadegh is leading Iran toward chaos. None of it is true. But repetition has its own arithmetic. Then the clergy. Iran's religious establishment is not monolithic. There are figures within it who fear secular nationalism, who see Mossadegh's democratic modernism as a direct threat to their own authority and influence. British intelligence identifies them, not through ideology, but through financial pressure points, institutions that need funding, figures whose influence could be amplified with the right resources arriving through the right intermediaries. The money does not buy belief, it buys behavior, and behavior, sustained long enough, becomes the public record. Then the military. Not mass bribery, targeted recruitment. Specific officers in specific command positions. Men who will need to be either neutral or active when the moment comes. Then the streets. Tehran has organized political gangs. The Rashidians have the relationships. Britain has the money. By the end of 1951, the machine exists. 2 years before the coup. Britain has given it a name, Operation Boot, to boot someone out. Simple, British, precise. There's only one problem. Operation Boot requires American cover. Not because Britain lacks the capability, but because a coup backed solely by Britain risks being immediately identified as what it is, an empire destroying a democracy to protect an oil company. In late 1951, British intelligence briefs the Truman administration. And here is where Britain shows exactly how tactically brilliant and how ruthless it could be. The pitch says nothing about oil, nothing about profits, nothing about Abadan, nothing about 16%. Instead, Mossadegh's coalition includes Iranian communists. If his government destabilizes, the Soviet Union fills the vacuum. Iran's oil, sitting on the Soviet border, falls to Moscow. Read that again. Britain has just reframed its private commercial problem as America's existential security nightmare. It is not about what Britain wants. It is about what America stands to lose. If you don't act, your enemy gets stronger. It is one of the oldest moves in geopolitics. And for a moment, it almost works. President Truman's response comes through Secretary of State Dean Acheson. Acheson's private assessment is more direct. What Britain is proposing looks exactly like what it is. A colonial power using its intelligence services to overthrow a foreign government that threatened its commercial interests. America will not participate. Without American cover, Operation Boot stalls. Derbyshire's network sits waiting in Tehran. Months pass. Then, in January 1953, everything changes. Dwight D. Eisenhower takes office, and Britain walks back into Washington with the same plan and the same pitch. The CIA's own analysts are skeptical. Their internal assessments describe Mossadegh as a nationalist Democrat, a man motivated by sovereignty, not ideology. Those reports do not reach the decision makers in time. Alan Dulles, the new CIA director, approves American participation. Budget, $1 million. CIA codename, Operation Ajax. British codename, Operation Boot. Same operation. 2 names. One of them, history remembers. The CIA sends Kermit Roosevelt Jr. to Tehran, July 1953. He is 37 years old, the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt, an experienced officer. He arrives with an American budget and an American code name. He runs the operation from inside the American embassy. But the network he runs belongs to Norman Derbyshire. The Rashidian brothers are already in position. The newspapers are already printing. The military officers are already recruited. The gangs are already organized. Roosevelt's job is not to build the machine. It is to switch it on. The plan has 3 stages. Stage 1. Manufacture a constitutional crisis. Use the funded press and political allies to pressure the Shah into signing a royal decree dismissing Mossadegh. Under Iranian law, the Shah holds this power. The question is whether he will use it. He hesitates. He fears Mossadegh's popularity. He fears international reaction. The Rashidian brothers visit him. British assurances arrive through back channels. American guarantees come through Roosevelt. On August 15, 1953, the Shah signs the decree. Stage 2. Deploy the military. General Fazlollah Zahedi, an Iranian officer receiving British payments since 1951, is designated as the next prime minister. Loyalist military units move to arrest Mossadegh under the authority of the royal decree. It fails. Because Mossadegh is Mossadegh. A man who had spent 30 years navigating Iranian politics. A man who had watched Britain orchestrate a coup once before, in 1921, and had spent his entire career warning his country about exactly this. He understood British methods. He had studied them. He had written about them in Parliament. He was not naive. He had his own network, his own intelligence, his own loyal officers who were watching for exactly this kind of move. The officer sent to deliver the royal decree is himself arrested before he reaches the door. By the morning of August 16th, the coup has collapsed. The Shah flees, Baghdad, then Rome. Roosevelt considers aborting. He calls Washington. Washington tells him the decision is his. He chooses to continue. Stage 3. The streets. This is Derbyshire's machine, at full capacity, doing what 2 years of construction built it to do. The Rashidians move first. Paid crowds pour into the streets of Tehran. Not thousands, tens of thousands. Organized, directed, moving with purpose through specific districts, toward specific targets. These are not spontaneous protesters. They are hired. Then the religious figures, men who have been in British pay for over a year, appear publicly to denounce Mossadegh. In mosques, in public squares, voices the ordinary Iranian trusts, saying words that were written, funded, and directed from a building in London. Then the gangs. Street fighting breaks out across the city. Not random, targeted, creating the visual impression of a country turning against its own government. And underneath the chaos, the military units loyal to Zahedi are moving. By mid-afternoon on August 19th, loyalist forces have taken the radio station, the telephone exchange, the key government buildings. Tehran is cut off from itself. At his residence, Mossadegh knows it is over. He does not flee. He does not barricade himself inside. He does not make a final broadcast or call for resistance that would cost more Iranian lives. He waits. Just after midnight, the doors come off their hinges. Soldiers pour in. Mossadegh is found in his bedroom, in his pajamas. The 69-year-old man who had beaten Britain in every court, every legal chamber, every democratic institution. Arrested. The coup has cost Britain 2 years of planning, hundreds of recruited assets, an infrastructure built piece by piece across an entire city. It has cost the CIA $1 million in 4 weeks on the ground. History credited the CIA. After the coup, a new oil consortium is assembled. Britain takes 40%, American companies take 40%, Iran receives 50% of declared profits, with no independent audit rights. General Zahedi becomes prime minister. The parliament that voted unanimously for nationalization is dissolved. Mossadegh is tried for treason, found guilty, 3 years in prison, then house arrest until his death in 1967. He never recants. He never apologizes. He maintains until the end that the oil belonged to Iran and the law was on his side. He was right on both counts. The intelligence apparatus Zahedi builds becomes SAVAK, Iran's secret police, a surveillance and torture apparatus so vast it employed tens of thousands of agents in a country of 20 million people, with one purpose, to ensure that no Iranian ever organized politically again. That story belongs to the video that follows. In 2013, the CIA formally acknowledges its role in the coup. The declassified documents are specific, detailed, damning. Britain's acknowledgement takes considerably longer. The full MI6 files on Operation Boot remain classified. Norman Derbyshire gives one interview before his death, in a 1985 documentary that is partially suppressed. He describes what he built with something between professional pride and unease. He had not anticipated the Shah's 26-year rule, the systematic torture, the revolution that followed. He had been given a mission: remove Mossadegh. He completed it. What came after was, in the bureaucratic logic of intelligence work, someone else's problem. The CIA gets most of the blame for 1953. In some ways, Britain planned it that way too. A CIA operation sounds like Cold War geopolitics. Regrettable, but understandable in context. A British operation sounds like what it actually was: an empire refusing to accept that its time was over, using its intelligence services to destroy a democracy because that democracy had the audacity to claim its own oil. Operation Boot was the British name. History used the American one, but the network, the agents, the bribed officers, the paid clergy, the organized mobs, the 2 years of careful construction, those were British, every one of them. And every time a Western diplomat expresses confusion about why Iran distrusts foreign intentions, every time a negotiation collapses and nobody understands why, the answer does not begin with Kermit Roosevelt arriving in Tehran in 1953. It begins with Norman Derbyshire in 1951, in the dark, building something that history would spend 70 years misremembering. In 1953, the world got one story: a CIA operation, an American budget, an American codename. The British version stayed classified. The boots on the ground were British. The credit went elsewhere. And the consequences, the Shah, the torture, the revolution, the hostility that shapes every headline about Iran today, those consequences belong to everyone who made that decision, in Washington and in London. The coup is the end of one story. What Britain built on the ruins, and what Iranians eventually did about it, that is the story that follows. If this is the kind of history you want, subscribe, because there are more stories like this one, and most people have never heard them. One question for the comments: if Operation Boot had never happened, what would Iran look like today?